Title: I collapsed mid-workout at a high-intensity gym class. My trainer never let go of my hand. The room went black before I hit the mat. Someone caught me before my head touched the floor. Her hands were shaking harder than mine. "Stay with me," she whispered. And something in me broke open. I didn't know her name yet. 3 months later. She was the reason I stopped hiding. But first, someone had to try to tear us apart. My name is Casey Whitfield, 29 years old, living in Denver, Colorado. Working long hours as a software project manager who used exercise to outrun everything I refused to feel. I had spent years building a life that looked perfect on paper. Engaged once. Dating men out of habit. Until one ordinary Tuesday changed the entire shape of my future. I joined Ironline Fitness 3 weeks earlier. Chasing a New Year's resolution I barely believed in. Desperate for something to control besides my own tangled feelings. The instructor leading the 6 a.m. class was named Jordan Reyes. Patient. With a voice that somehow made burpees feel survivable. That Thursday I pushed too hard. Skipped breakfast. Ignored the dizziness building behind my eyes because admitting weakness wasn't something I did well. The last thing I remember was the clang of a dropped kettlebell. Then Jordan's face swimming above mine. Calling my name like it mattered. I woke up on a gym mat with an ice pack against my neck and Jordan's fingers still wrapped tightly around my wrist. "You scared me," she said quietly. Not letting go even after the color returned to my cheeks and my breathing steadied. I laughed it off. Embarrassed. But something about the worry in her eyes stayed with me long after I left the building. The next morning she texted the number from my intake form, just to check if I'd eaten breakfast like she told me to. I hadn't planned on replying with more than a thumbs up. But somehow we texted for 2 hours about nothing and everything. She started leaving protein bars on my gym bag hook. A small ridiculous gesture that made me smile every single day that week. I told myself it was just a trainer being thorough. Even as I found reasons to arrive early just to talk to her. One evening she offered to walk me to my car. And we stood in the parking lot for 40 minutes. Neither of us leaving first. Weeks passed and our conversation stopped feeling like coincidence. Moving from workout tips to childhoods. Failed relationships. And the parts of ourselves we usually hid. Jordan told me she'd moved to Denver 5 years earlier from Ann Arbor. Chasing distance from a family that never quite understood her. I mentioned my older sister Emily had gone to college in Michigan too. And Jordan's face flickered with something I couldn't quite place. "Small world," she said quickly, changing the subject before I could ask anything further. Though the moment lingered strangely in my mind. I didn't think much of it then. Too distracted by the warmth spreading through my chest whenever she looked at me that way. My friend Priya noticed first. Teasing me over drinks that I talked about my trainer more than I talked about my actual job. "You light up when you say her name," Priya said. And I laughed it off. Though I couldn't deny the truth in it. I dated men my whole adult life. Including Mark. My college boyfriend turned fiancé. Before I called off our engagement 2 years earlier. I told myself back then it was cold feet. Timing. Anything except the quiet. Persistent feeling that something essential had never fit right. Jordan invited me to a Saturday hike outside Denver, insisting it was off the clock, though we both knew it wasn't really about training. We reached the summit as the sun broke over the Rockies, and she handed me water without a word, just watching my reaction. "I don't do this with clients," she admitted suddenly, staring at the horizon instead of at me. Her voice quieter than I'd heard before. "Do what?" asked, though I already suspected the answer. My heart pounding louder than the wind moving through the pines around us. "Care this much," she said, finally turning to face me. And for a moment neither of us moved or breathed or looked away. I felt something shift permanently inside me. A door I'd kept locked for years creaking open without my permission or full understanding. We didn't kiss that day. Both of us too aware of the risk. But the air between us had changed into something undeniable. That night I lay awake replaying every conversation, every accidental touch, terrified of a truth I'd spent my whole life avoiding. I called Emily. Not ready to say everything. Just enough to test the words aloud. I think I might have feelings for a woman. Emily went quiet for a long moment, then said gently, Casey, I've wondered about you for years. I just needed you to see it yourself. Her acceptance cracked something open in me. Relief and grief tangled together for all the years I'd spent performing a life that wasn't mine. I started researching, reading, letting myself imagine a future I'd never allowed my mind to picture before that hike on the mountain. Jordan and I kept training together, but everything felt different now. Charged, careful, like we were both waiting for permission neither of us could give. At my birthday dinner, Jordan showed up uninvited by anyone but me and my mother. Diane watched the two of us a little too closely. Your trainer seems very invested in your well-being, my mother said afterward. Her tone unreadable, and I couldn't tell if she suspected anything. 2 weeks later, Jordan finally kissed me. In her car outside my apartment, rain streaking the windows, both of us laughing through nervous tears. I've wanted to do that since the day you fainted, she confessed. And I told her I'd wanted it since the ice pack. We started seeing each other properly after that. Careful at first. Meeting at her apartment instead of anywhere we might be recognized. I felt more myself in those quiet evenings than I had in 29 years of trying to be someone easier for others to accept. Jordan cooked for me. Badly but earnestly. And I discovered she was funnier. Softer. More unguarded than the confident trainer I'd first met. She told me about her father, a pastor in Michigan, who hadn't spoken to her since she came out at 22 years old. I held her that night, understanding for the first time how much courage it had taken her to build a life on her own terms. My own family still didn't know, and the weight of that secret sat uneasily beside the happiness I was finally allowing myself to feel. Mark texted me out of nowhere that month, mentioning he was back in Denver and wanted to catch up, a request that unsettled me. I ignored it at first, but Jordan noticed my phone buzzing repeatedly and asked, gently, if everything between us was actually okay. It's fine, I said too quickly, and she didn't push. Though I saw the flicker of doubt cross her face before she looked away. 3 months in.
I told Jordan I loved her.
Standing in her kitchen while pasta boiled over. Forgotten. On the stove behind us. I love you too, she said. And for one perfect evening, none of the fear waiting outside that apartment seemed to matter at all. I started imagining a real future. Introducing her properly. Building something lasting. Even as some quiet part of me stayed braced for trouble. That trouble arrived faster than I expected. In the form of a photo neither of us knew had been taken at the summit. A gym member named Kayla, jealous of the attention Jordan gave me, had snapped it months earlier and finally decided to use it. The picture of us holding hands on the trail appeared in my family's group chat with no explanation except a single question mark. My mother called within the hour, her voice tight and formal, asking if there was something I needed to tell her about. I hadn't planned to come out over the phone, standing frozen in my kitchen, but there was no version of silence left available to me. Yes, I said finally. I'm seeing Jordan. I'm gay. Mom, I should have told you myself, and I'm sorry I didn't. The line went quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped, until she said only, I need time, and hung up. I sat on my kitchen floor for an hour. Jordan's arms around me, both of us bracing for whatever fallout was still coming. My father didn't call at all that week, and his silence felt louder and more painful than any argument could have been. Emily texted constantly, trying to soften the blow, reminding me our mother had never handled surprises well, especially ones involving her own assumptions. At the gym, whispers spread quickly, and the owner, a man named Rick, called me into his office with a carefully neutral expression. Some members have raised concerns, Rick said, about a trainer-client relationship affecting the professional atmosphere here, though I sensed it was about more than that. Rick suggested that Jordan be reassigned to a different location across town, citing liability, though everyone understood the real reason behind it. Jordan refused to hide, telling him plainly that her personal life outside working hours was not something the gym had authority over. Though, the tension at work grew heavier. Colleagues avoiding eye contact, members whispering when we walked past, treating our happiness like a scandal. My mother didn't call for 3 weeks, and every silent day felt like proof that I'd broken something between us permanently. Mark showed up at my office unannounced, saying he'd heard the news and wanted to make sure I was thinking clearly about my choices. This isn't a phase, Mark, I told him, my voice steadier than I felt, though his presence still managed to shake something loose in me. He mentioned running into my mother at church, implying they'd bonded over their shared concern, a detail that made my stomach twist uncomfortably. I started wondering if people from my old life were quietly organizing themselves against the new one I was trying to build. Jordan sensed my growing anxiety and asked if I regretted any of it, if the cost of being with her felt too high now. Never you, I said honestly. Just everyone circling around us like we're a problem that needs solving instead of 2 people in love. Kayla, the coworker who'd leaked our photo, started a rumor that Jordan had pursued me inappropriately while I was still technically her client. It wasn't true, but the accusation gave Rick an excuse to open a formal complaint, threatening Jordan's job over something that never happened. I offered to speak to management directly, but Jordan asked me not to, afraid it would only make the story about scandal instead of truth. Meanwhile, my father finally called, his voice careful and formal, asking only whether this was something I could still change my mind about. I told him no, gently but firmly, and he said he needed to pray on it, a response that felt like both rejection and hope. Emily became my anchor during those weeks, showing up with takeout, letting me cry, reminding me that our parents' timeline wasn't mine to control. Jordan grew quieter at work, guarded, and I noticed her checking job listings late at night when she thought I was already asleep. "What are you looking at?" I asked one evening, and she hesitated before admitting she'd applied for a position at a gym in Seattle. My chest tightened instantly, fear rushing in before I could stop it, though I tried to keep my voice calm as I asked why. "I need an exit if Rick pushes this complaint further," she explained. "I can't lose everything because someone decided to punish us for existing." I understood the logic, but the thought of losing her to another city felt like losing the only steady ground I'd finally found. We argued for the first time that night, not about love, but about fear, and how differently we each carried the weight of it. "I won't ask you to stay somewhere that isn't safe for you," I said, "but I need you to talk to me before you decide." She apologized, admitting she'd been protecting herself out of old habit, a reflex built from years of preparing to leave before being pushed out. We agreed to face Rick's investigation together instead of separately, refusing to let fear make decisions neither of us actually wanted to make. The formal meeting was scheduled for the following week, and in the meantime, whispers at the gym only grew louder and more pointed. A few members quietly offered support, including an older woman named Barbara, who told me she'd hidden her own marriage for 30 years. "Don't do what I did," Barbara said. "Don't wait until you're 70 to stop apologizing for who you love." Her words stayed with me. My mother finally agreed to meet for coffee, though the conversation felt stiff, careful, both of us stepping around the edges of everything unsaid. "I don't understand it," she admitted, "but I don't want to lose you over something I don't understand." It wasn't acceptance, but it was something. I left that meeting more hopeful than I'd felt in weeks, even as the threat to Jordan's job still hung heavy over both our heads. The night before the investigation meeting, Jordan admitted she was terrified, not of losing the job, but of losing her sense of belonging again. "You already belong," I told her. "Here. With me. No matter what happens in that office tomorrow." She held on to those words tightly. At the meeting, Rick presented Kayla's complaint alongside vague accusations from other unnamed members, none of which held up under direct questioning. Jordan calmly explained the timeline, proving our relationship began only after I'd completed my training package, with texts and dates to support it. I spoke to, describing how she'd never once crossed a line, how everything between us had been mutual, honest, and slow to unfold. Rick, visibly uncomfortable, said he'd review the findings, a vague answer that left us both uncertain whether this fight was truly over. Kayla, cornered by the evidence, finally admitted she'd exaggerated the story out of jealousy after Jordan had turned down her advances months earlier. That confession changed everything. And Rick, embarrassed, dropped the complaint entirely. Though the damage to the gym's atmosphere had already been done, Jordan withdrew her Seattle application that same week, telling me she wanted to fight for the life we were building, not run from it. I felt lighter than I had in months, though I knew the hardest conversation, the one with my father, was still waiting ahead of us. My father requested a private dinner, just the two of us, and I spent the drive over rehearsing arguments I hoped I wouldn't need. He surprised me by opening with an apology, admitting his silence had been about his own fear, not disappointment in who I'd become. I grew up believing certain things were sins, he said carefully, but I love you more than I love being right about anything. It wasn't the smoothest apology, but it was real, and I felt years of tension begin to loosen in my chest for the first time. I invited Jordan to family dinner the following month, nervous but hopeful, wanting my parents to see her the way I did. My mother was polite but distant that evening, asking careful questions, though I noticed her softening slightly whenever Jordan made me laugh. Afterward, my mother pulled me aside and said quietly, "She looks at you the way your father used to look at me." I noticed. It wasn't a full embrace, but it was progress. And I left that night believing the hardest obstacles were finally behind us. I was wrong. The real test of everything we built together was still waiting, closer than either of us realized at the time. 3 weeks after the family dinner, I fainted again. This time at my desk. Hard enough that a coworker called an ambulance immediately. At the hospital, doctors ran tests and discovered an irregular heart rhythm, something I'd apparently been ignoring symptoms of for over a year. Jordan arrived before my parents did, breathless, refusing to let go of my hand the exact same way she had at the gym. "This is starting to become a pattern," she joked weakly, though I could see real fear behind the tired attempt at humor. The cardiologist explained I'd need a minor procedure to correct the arrhythmia, manageable but serious enough to require weeks of careful monitoring afterward. I felt strangely calm delivering the news to my parents, grateful that whatever else had changed, they showed up immediately without hesitation. My mother stayed at my apartment for a week afterward, cooking, fussing, and for the first time treating Jordan like family instead of a stranger. Jordan barely left my side during recovery, and one night, exhausted, she admitted she'd lost a previous partner to a sudden illness years earlier. "I never told you because I didn't want you to see me as fragile," she said. "But watching you in that hospital bed terrified me." I understood then why she sometimes pulled away when things felt too good, bracing herself against a loss she'd already survived once before. We grew closer through that fear instead of apart, talking honestly for the first time about the things we'd both been avoiding. Just as things stabilized, Mark resurfaced again, this time reaching out to Jordan directly through a message on social media I never saw. He told her I'd called him during my hospital stay, confused and vulnerable, implying I'd said things about missing our old relationship. None of it was true. But Jordan, still raw from her own history of loss, felt an old fear reignite without her fully realizing it. She grew distant that week, canceling plans, giving short answers, until I finally asked directly what had changed so suddenly between us. "Did you call Mark from the hospital?" she asked, and the accusation hit me like a slap. Sharp and completely unexpected. Never, I said. Stunned. Jordan. I would never do that. Where is this even coming from? She showed me the screenshots Mark had sent. The messages were doctored. Poorly. But convincing enough in her exhausted, frightened state to plant a seed of doubt she couldn't shake. I felt betrayed twice over. First by Mark's manipulation, and then by how quickly Jordan had believed a stranger's word over mine. You should have asked me first, I said, my voice breaking. Not him. Me. She had no answer. Only guilt written plainly across her face. We fought harder than we ever had. Old fears surfacing on both sides. Until Jordan finally left my apartment late that night. Shaken. For 2 weeks we barely spoke. Both of us proud and hurting. Convinced the other should be the one to reach out first. Emily. Furious on my behalf. Tracked down Mark's number and confronted him directly, discovering he'd forwarded the same lie to 2 of my coworkers. He admitted, cornered, that he'd hoped exposing chaos in my new relationship might somehow convince me to reconsider our old one together. Emily forwarded proof of his admission to me immediately, and I sat staring at my phone, torn between vindication and complete exhaustion. I debated whether to even send it to Jordan, wondering if the damage between us had already gone too deep to repair easily. My mother, of all people, encouraged me to fight for it. I watched you shrink for years with the wrong person, she said. Don't shrink now. I drove to Jordan's apartment that evening, proof in hand. Unsure whether I was walking toward closure or one final, painful goodbye. She opened the door already crying, saying she'd spent 2 weeks realizing how badly she'd let old fear override the trust we'd built. I showed her Mark's confession anyway, needing her to see the truth clearly, needing us both to stop building conclusions on assumptions. I'm so sorry, she said. I let what I lost before make me doubt what I actually have now. That's not fair to you. We sat on her floor for hours, untangling everything, promising to ask each other hard questions instead of letting fear answer them for us. It wasn't a perfect fix. Trust doesn't rebuild in a single conversation, but it was a real beginning towards something steadier than before. 2 weeks later, Jordan received an unexpected phone call, her estranged father reaching out for the first time in nearly 7 years. He told her he was sick, diagnosed recently, and wanted to reconcile before it was too late to say the things left unsaid. Jordan was terrified to see him, certain he still carried the same judgment that had driven her out of his house at 22. I offered to go with her, and after a long pause, she said yes, admitting she didn't think she could face him completely alone. The drive to Michigan felt endless, both of us quiet, rehearsing words that might not matter once we actually stood in front of him. Her father opened the door looking smaller than she'd described him, older, tired, his anger apparently worn down by years and illness both. I was wrong, he said before she'd even said hello. About a lot of things. I don't have time left to keep being wrong. Jordan cried harder than I'd ever seen her. Years of hurt and hope colliding in a hallway that smelled faintly of his old cologne. He looked at me then, asked my name, and when Jordan introduced me as her girlfriend, he simply nodded and said, "Good. I'm glad." It wasn't a full healing. There were still hard conversations ahead, but it cracked open a door Jordan had believed permanently sealed shut. On the drive home, she held my hand the entire way, quiet, processing, occasionally crying softly at moments I let pass without comment. "Thank you for coming," she said eventually. "I don't think I could have survived that room without you sitting beside me." I just squeezed her hand. We returned to Denver changed, lighter somehow. Both of us finally letting go of old fears we'd carried far longer than necessary. Rick, perhaps sensing the shifted mood at the gym, quietly promoted Jordan to lead trainer. An unspoken apology for the earlier investigation. Kayla had since quit, embarrassed after her lie unraveled publicly, and the gym slowly returned to something resembling its old, easy atmosphere. Mark stopped contacting me entirely after Emily's confrontation, and I finally felt free of the last tether connecting me to my old life. 6 months after that hospital bed, I stood in my kitchen one evening when Jordan asked me a question that changed everything again. "Move in with me," she said simply. No grand speech. Just quiet certainty in her eyes as she waited for my answer. I said yes before she'd even finished the sentence, laughing through sudden tears at how simple the biggest decisions could sometimes feel. We spent the following weeks packing boxes, arguing lightly over furniture, building a shared space that finally felt like a real home. My mother helped us paint the living room, something I never imagined happening a year earlier when she'd hung up the phone on me. "I still don't fully understand everything," she admitted one afternoon, "but I understand that you're happier than I've ever seen you. That's enough now." My father visited too, quieter than my mother, but present, helping assemble a bookshelf without needing anyone to explain himself. Jordan's father's health declined faster than expected that winter, and we drove back to Michigan twice more before the final visit. He passed away on a Tuesday morning, Jordan holding his hand, finally at peace with a relationship he'd repaired just in time. At the funeral, several relatives approached Jordan afterward, saying her father had spoken proudly of her in his final months, unprompted, unguarded. He kept a photo of us on his nightstand, Jordan told me later, stunned. I didn't even know he had one. Grief and relief tangled together. I held her through that loss the way she'd held me through the hospital months earlier. Understanding love meant showing up for the hardest parts too. We returned to Denver changed again. Grief settling into our new home alongside everything good we'd built there together already. That spring, Jordan suggested we host a small gathering, inviting both our families under one roof for the very first time. I was nervous, certain something would go wrong, old tensions resurfacing the moment everyone occupied the same space at once. Instead, I watched my mother laugh with Jordan's aunt over old photographs, watched my father help Jordan's cousin fix a grill that wouldn't light. Emily pulled me aside during the party, smiling. "You built this," she said. "All of it. I'm so proud of who you became." Later that evening, Jordan led me outside to the same string lights we'd hung the week we moved in, her hands slightly trembling. She got down on one knee before I fully understood what was happening, holding a small ring that had belonged to her mother. "I know we've survived a lot," she said, "and I don't want to survive anything else without officially calling you mine. Permanently. On paper." I said yes immediately, laughing and crying at once, barely hearing the applause erupting from both our families gathered on the porch. My mother cried harder than I did, hugging Jordan tightly, whispering something I never asked her to repeat, but that clearly mattered deeply. We planned a small wedding for early autumn. Nothing extravagant, just the people who had actually shown up when it mattered most. Rick, of all people, offered to close the gym early for our staff so everyone could attend, a gesture that surprised us both. Barbara, the older member who'd once told me not to wait until 70, cried through the entire ceremony, gripping her own wife's hand tightly. My father walked me partway down the aisle before pausing, hand on my shoulder. "I'm still learning," he said, "but I'm here. That matters." I nodded, unable to speak, and continued the rest of the walk alone, exactly the way I wanted it, toward the life I'd chosen. Jordan waited at the end of the aisle in a simple ivory suit, eyes already wet, looking at me like I was the only person there. We exchanged vows we'd written ourselves, mentioning gyms and hospital rooms in Michigan hallways, the ordinary places where extraordinary love had quietly taken root. "You caught me the first time I fell," I said, "and you never once let go, even when I gave you every reason to." Jordan smiled through tears. "I'm not planning on starting now," she said, and the small crowd around us laughed softly through their own tears. We danced our first dance to a song neither of us particularly liked, both too happy to care. Spinning slowly under string lights. My mother found me near the dessert table later, squeezing my hand. "I used to worry about the life you'd have," she said. "Now I just admire it." I thought about the version of myself who fainted in a gym 8 months earlier, terrified of a truth she couldn't yet name aloud. That version of me could never have imagined this porch, these lights, this ring, or the courage it had taken to arrive here. Jordan found me again as the night wound down, pulling me close, resting her forehead against mine the way she always did. "No more hiding," she whispered, and I whispered it back, meaning it completely. For the first time in my entire adult life, somewhere between the fainting and the vows, I'd stopped surviving my own life and finally, fully, started living it instead. Looking back, I realized the collapse that terrified me most became the exact moment that saved my life, opening a door I'd kept locked for years. I am Casey Whitfield, and I am no longer afraid of who I love, who I am, or the beautifully unexpected life we built together. Andy.